Uh, Hello everyone. I'm grateful for the chance to present at this conference, though I'm heartbroken not to be there in person, so I have looked forward to meeting you and building conversation beyond the screen. My name is Amir Salehi. I am a second year PhD student in the Faculty of Social Sciences at McMaster University, working at the intersection of two departments, religious studies and gender and social justice. Before this, I spent over a decade studying philosophy at the University of Tehran, completing a PhD on Hegel and Marx and the notion of praxis. Here, I'm developing an ethnographically oriented dissertation prospectus on how technologies, from artificial intelligence to social media, are reshaping, dismantling, and reconfiguring both elite and popular structure of religious authority in Iran. So what I share today is an early step, not a definitive analysis, but a theoretical meditation and reflection on a pressing question: what is unfolding in the domain of religiosity and religious authority in Iran, particularly as it affects different actors, from the clerical establishment to Gen Z, and what forms of agency emerge amid this transformation. One final note before I begin: the impetus behind this second PhD came from my little sister, a Gen Z woman who, like many others in Iran, has suffered a lot the intersecting constraints of religious, political, and cultural power. So this project is both personal and academic for me. Let me begin with a scene that crystallizes the rupture I'm trying to trace. On a street in Iran, a young woman walks up to a Shia cleric and knocks the turban from his head. She runs before he can react. The video, shot on the smartphone, spreads within hours. Within days, dozens more appear online. The turban, once a sacred object, becomes a meme, a target of mockery, a fleeting act of rebellion. This moment is not merely political or generational. It marks a rupture at the level of meaning itself, a collapse of the symbolic order that once sustained religious and political legitimacy. For Iran's Gen Z, raised within a different aesthetic and epistemic paradigm, once sacred vocabularies, Shahid, Imam, Ummat, Velayat, no longer evoke reverence. More than that, they no longer refer to a world they inhabit. These terms circulate as hollowed signifiers, stripped of their metaphysical and historical resonance. The Islamic Republic builds its authority by fusing a particular Shia theology with the machinery of the nation state. But that symbolic grammar no longer translates. It fails to communicate across the sensory and epistemological field inhabited by this generation. And by this generation, I mean this generation onward. This is not simply a failure of governance. It signals a deeper ontological and epistemic shift. Gen Z's mode of perception, speech, and performance are shaped by meme culture, algorithmic platforms, and capitalist aesthetics, forms of subjectivity that elude traditional mechanisms of religious authority. This talks about not only whether the regime is collapsing, but whether the very conditions that once made authority possible are still intact. I approach this through four movements. First, how the Islamic Republic constructed religious authority. Second, how Gen Z enacts a rupture through irreverent performance and meme logic. Third, how communicative capitalism absorbs and commodifies dissent. And finally, what kinds of imagination, theological or political, might be possible in post-sacral world. The Islamic Republic emerged from a fusion of a particular Shia theological jurisprudential tradition and modern state apparatus. This hybrid, part theocracy, part bureaucracy, has been a source of both durability and fragility. From the outset, the regime claimed not just territorial sovereignty, but the power to define truth, belief, and visibility. In Achille Mbembe's terms, it operated necropolitically, deciding who may live, who must die, and who may be seen or erased. Women defying hijab, protesting students, ethnic minorities, and foreign conspirators were framed as existential threats. A continuous state of exception consolidated this authority in the supreme leader. But this was not naked power. It was cloaked in sacred language, martyrdom, guardianship, divine obedience. The Islamic Republic drew on a reading of Islamic political thought that invokes the shadow of Al-Farabi's prophet philosopher and reinterprets Quranic injunctions like obey God, obey the messenger, and those in authority among you. This justified post-occultation authority of jurists, crystallizing in Khomeini's radical claim that Islam is inherently political. The faqih became both a spiritual guide and the sovereign. Yet, as Andrew March argues, modern Islamic political thought often preserves a Schmittian core. The sovereign is one who decides on the exception, even to divine law. In post-revolution Iran, this logic plays out through shifting alliances, contradictions in foreign policy, and selective solidarities. The principle of Hifz al-Nizam, preservation of the regime, justifies the suspension of both religious and civic norms. This logic extends beyond law. The IRGC functions as a Deleuzian war machine, not just a military body, but a cultural and economic force. It controls industry, media, and public morality, embedding itself in everyday life. Yet sacred power is fragile when sacredness erodes. Over time, key terms like Shaheed, Imam, Ummah have been hollowed out. Once filled with the spiritual and emotional charge, they now serve as instruments of repression and economic hardship. For Gen Z, these words provoke irony, not reverence. The early 21st century marked a turning point. The arrival of the internet. Initially a tool for mobilization, especially during the 2009 Green Movement, the internet has since become a totalizing condition. It's no longer something people use. It is something through which they are formed. Gen Z inhabits a world of speed, fragmentation, and algorithmic aesthetic. Sacred terms are not debated. They are memed. Instagram bios read abiding by IRR law, تابع قوانین جمهوری اسلامی, while users post fashion, parody, and defiance, openly subverts the spirit of those very laws. Concepts like situationships proliferate in ways that were once unthinkable. Even clerics now practice blogging. AI and social media have seeped into the fracture of the seminary system, introducing new categories like the fiqh of the AI, fiqh هوش مصنوعی. The state once tried to cordon off Western values while embracing technological progress. But technology is never neutral. As Heidegger warned, it is a world disclosing force. Unlike Techne, modern technology challenges, herausfordern, the world, ordering it as standing reserve, Bestand, ready for exploitation. The internet did not simply arrive in Iran. It brought with it new modes of being, knowing, and relating. The result is not just political crisis, but epistemological rupture. The scaffolding of religious authority, premised on sacred hierarchy, textual interpretation, and affective resonance, is dissolving. not only due to policy failure, but because the very condition of subjectivity, communication, and belief have changed. In the 20th century, authoritarian regime controlled media to monopolize meaning. The Islamic Republic followed suit, saturating public life with symbols of martyrdom, clerical authority, and revolutionary dedication. But the digital age shattered this monopoly. Smartphones, encrypted messaging, and global platforms ushered in a new censor regime, one that enabled dissent, coordinated protests, and shaped tangible political shift, notably during the Arab Spring. The Islamic Republic has not simply lost control, it has adapted through countermeasures, like denying attention rather than blocking access, demonizing platforms, and deploying targeted harassment. I will revisit this point shortly, but it can no longer fully police, discipline, or even comprehend the landscape. Iran Gen Z does not confront authority with counter-ideology. They mock it, remix it, or ignore it. The turban drop is not a call for reform. It is a withdrawal of recognition. Their grammar is irreverence, not opposition. Sacred terms are not debated. They are memed. This is no longer satire in the classical sense. Iran's long tradition of political satire, from the constitutional revolution to the reformist press, has shifted form. Gen Z does not use the internet to distribute satire. They dwell inside a mimetic world. Their aesthetic and affective lexicon, words like slay, low-key, pick-me, aura, is global, algorithmic, and free from theological idioms. So what becomes of sacred language in this context? It floats. Words like Shaheed, Imam, Velayat, Ummah drift as hollow slogans. They no longer unify belief. They survive as what Ernesto Laclau calls empty or floating signifiers, radically open to parody, inversion, or oblivion. In moments of hegemonic crisis, signifiers become unstable. In Laclau's words, quote, the hegemonic identity becomes something of the order of an empty signifier, end of quote. Shaheed, Khun, Vatan, once carried profound affective charge, are now sites of contestation. Even concepts like religious democracy, Mardum Salehi, Dini, Ummat Musalman have lost their coherence. This is not secularization in Enlightenment terms. It is ontological indifference, a disaffection so profound that the sacred no longer registers as a meaningful horizon, either to affirm or to reject. Here, Rancière's theory of dissensus helps. For him, politics does not emerge through representation, but through a rupture in the distribution of the sensible. Who is seen, who is heard, and what can be said. Politics begins when, quote-unquote, part with no part appears and disrupts the order of bodies and meanings. Gen Z does not argue with the sacred language of the regime. They render it illegible and inaudible. They perform what Rancière calls l'auteur, the wrong that unsettles the presumptions of the common sense. Yet a tension remains. Are these acts strategic or symptoms of disaffection? Gen Z's performance is messy, affective, ironic, and precarious. Their refusal of coherence is a source of power and vulnerability. Attempts by the state to revive sacred vocabulary deepen the rupture. During the Mahsa Amini uprising, authorities tried to repackage woman-life freedom within patriarchal theocratic frames. These efforts failed. Even martyrdom, once the effective backbone of the regime, is now claimed, questioned, or inverted by the same youth it sought to inspire. Invoking Hannah Arendt, totalitarian regimes destroy not only truth, but the conditions under which belief is possible. In Iran, sacralized violence and propagandistic repetition have decade trust in religious claims and in the very possibility of belief. Sacredness is no longer a site of belief. It has become a site of exhaustion.
5 minutes. Yeah.
What emerges is a post-sacral aesthetic, not an alternative theology, but a refusal of theological grammar itself, a politics of irony, refusal, and visibility, but one without guarantees, organization, or promises of endurance.
And John, 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. If Gen Z's mimetic irreverence marks a rupture within the Islamic Republic's symbolic order, it also exposes deeper paradox. Visibility does not guarantee transformation. Digital platforms reward spectacle over structure. Acts of dissent circulate rapidly, accumulate affective intensity, and disappear, consumed by an economy that prioritizes exposure over endurance. What looks like resistance risks becoming content, aestheticized, commodified, and absorbed. Judy Dean's theory of communicative capitalism is vital here. She calls it talk without response, a system where circulation replaces political action. Posts, hashtags, and memes simulate participation while diffusing energy into loops of engagement. Political speech becomes data, outrage becomes content. Deans identify this as technological fetishism, a belief that communication is inherently political. This logic deeply shapes Gen Z's digital activism in Iran. Turban drop videos, remixed slogans, ironic clerical memes. These acts rupture symbolic norms, but often within a closed loop. Visibility becomes both mean and an end. She also warns of victory and defeat, where the regime co-opts the language of protest to neutralize it. After the Mahsa Amini uprising, we saw this clearly. Zizek sharpened this critic. In late capitalism, Iranian critics no longer threaten power. They are expected. Drawing on the Marxian notion of the social symptom, an element that subverts its own universal premise, Zizek argues that systems incorporate dissents to mask their contradictions. This is the double edge of the Gen Z's digital dissent. On one hand, it unravels the regime's symbolic authority. On the other, it risks becoming input for the content economy. Brilliant, volatile, forgettable. A turban drops, becomes a meme, flashes, fades. So again, the question rises. Is this refusal of coherence a tactical move or a deeper ontological stance? I would argue this fragility is not accidental. It is structural. It is the shape of a world governed by platforms and algorithms. Agency becomes aesthetic, fragmented, performative. Even as Gen Z dismantles a scaffolding of sacred authority, they do so in a space that resists permanence. The internet provides rupture, not architecture. It's not a failure, it's a challenge. One that demands new theoretical frameworks, new strategies, not to recover the sacred, but to imagine what might still be possible in its absence. So conclusion. What we are witnessing in Iran today is not merely a generational uprising or the erosion of clerical legitimacy. It is a rupture in the very condition that once made authority possible. To frame it in Kantian terms, what are the conditions of possibility for religious authority in contemporary Iran? Even frameworks as sophisticated as Foucault's begin to falter. Power no longer flows from centralized institutions, but through platforms, algorithms, and infrastructures. In this regard, Benjamin Bratton's concepts of platform sovereignty, developed through his stack model, offers a provocative shift, positioned in dialogue with Schmitt's nomos and against Max Weber's bureaucracy, Louis Althusser's state apparatus, and Michel Foucault's governmentality. Bratton proposes a new conceptual architecture for sovereignty in the age of planetary computation. Territory is no longer the foundation. Stacked system of code, cloud, and interface now govern perception, circulation, and control. In such a world, can authority endure? Can the sacred still resonate in a digital field where meaning is fragmented, commodified, and forgotten? what kind of political theological imagination remains possible when permanence is the exception and virality the norm? The answer remains open. But this much is clear. We need new languages, new epistemologies, new imagination that do not mourn what's lost, but grapple with the world as it is. A world where meanings circulate without anchoring, and where belief is fragile. Whether new forms of authority will emerge, or whether we are witnessing authorities' slow dissolution, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: in their irreverence, Gen Z has made the clerical order visible not as sacred, but as contingent, historical, and increasingly absurd. And that perhaps is its own kind of revelation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Great. Wonderful.